Pushing Back the Shadows, support and awareness for mental health. Hello and welcome to episode 40 of the Pushing Back the Shadows podcast. My name's Alex Davis and I'm the founder of Pushing Back the Shadows. Golly, episode 40. You know, it's one of those things that when you're starting out you think, yeah, I'll never make that. Come on, who are you kidding? But here we are, and we've done it. And it's another one of the mile markers that we've reached. And do you know what? It is so amazing that we've actually come this far, because you never think you will, but then you hope that you will. But sometimes, you know, the little doubts inside your head actually get ahead of you and think, nah, who are you kidding? It'll never get that far. But we have, and it is all thanks to you guys. Our patrons, our listeners, our readers, video viewers, I lost the word then. Whoever you are, wherever you're from, your support is invaluable to us. So thank you ever so much for everything that you've done. I mean, we're just, we've been doing a little bit of number crunching recently, and to say that we've been overwhelmed is an understatement, because the Facebook page has really taken off over the last week, and the website starts looking good, and it really is encouraging to see everything that you guys are actually doing, getting involved with Pushing Back the Shadows. So thank you. But on to today's episode. Now, this is actually inspired by a reply that I had to one of my tweets. Those of you who know stuff about what we do, we tend to advertise our posts and our content on social media. And this was a reply to when I advertised the Harrowing Void a couple of days back. And it was quite an interesting response, because it used a word that I wouldn't normally think of in terms of mental health. And that in itself is what's inspired this particular episode. So, the Harrowing Void, for those of you who've not seen the post, and the link will be in the description as well if you wanted to check it out afterwards. But the Harrowing Void is the way that I describe the emptiness, the blackness. That feeling when there's just nothing there, when your depression kind of takes hold. It is almost like a void that's just sucking all the joy out, all the life, all the energy, everything, to leave nothing behind. And so I described it a little bit in the tweet, because, you know, it gives you a little bit of room to describe things. And I have to be honest, I am so glad that they did increase the character limit, because I was always bumping up against that and going, oh, for goodness sake, let's delete a little bit. But really, the Harrowing Void is what I would say is one of the biggest defining factors of my mental health. Which is fair enough. It's fine. And the comment that had come back was kind of good luck just floating across that. And that made me stop and think about the floating. Because how often do we just float? Now, I know some of you might say, well, okay, it's a void, yeah, you're going to float. But actually, we don't, do we? Yes, we can be floating in that void, kind of physically speaking. You know, we're just kind of, our feet can't touch the ground, we can't find something to grab onto, so technically speaking, we're floating. Or falling, depending on your viewpoint. But how often do we actually just be still and float? It's an interesting question. Because more often than not, we actually try and fight it, don't we? Oh, great, my depression's really bad, I've got to fight it. Oh, my anxiety's peaking, I've got to fight it. And that's the thing, they say about our fight or flight responses, and we either try and fight what we're going through, or we run away from it, don't we? It's not very often that we just let it be. So that's what I want to talk to you about today, that fight or flight, and maybe just letting it float. Because that in itself is quite important, and you'll see where I'm coming from as we delve deeper into the episode. So let's take a look, shall we? See what exactly I'm waffling on about. You're listening to Pushing Back the Shadows. So I remember when I was growing up, when we went on holiday, one of the things, if we ever went swimming, was that my mum would always encourage us to try and do a floating competition. Now, this was something that she used to do as a child, and it was one of those things that they do as a family. They'd start floating, and it would be see who can float the longest. Sounds quite good, up until the loser actually has to pay for the ice creams. But still, even though it sounds, even so, it still sounds quite good. And there's ice cream at the end, so who wouldn't like that? But she used to try and get us to do it as well. And I'll be honest, it was something that I was never too good at. I mean, she'd had plenty of practice. She could just float for absolute hours, I tell you. But it was still one of those things that she'd get us to try, and it was actually quite fun. Quite fun for us to do. Now, I'm still not much good at it. Part of the problem is that part of it is that I don't really go swimming because I have eczema, the chlorine in the pool disagrees with me, etc, etc, etc. But it all ties into this idea of floating instead of fighting. Because while you're floating in the pool, or the river, or wherever you're floating, all you're doing, really, is surrendering. You're not swimming against the current or with the current. You're not trying to dive. You're not doing anything, really, are you? You're just surrendering to the motion of the water. So for just a second, I want you to sit back and close your eyes, because you and I were going to do a little bit of imagining. Imagine that you're at the beach, okay, and you've gone into the sea. Now this can be warm water or cold water, whichever you prefer. I personally prefer it when the sea's a bit warm, but you can't always get what we want. And you swim out a little bit, and then you float. You just lie on your back, eyes closed, and you float. It's nice and calm and quiet, and you can feel the motion of the water around you as the waves gently come in. And you're not still, because you're bobbing up and down on the waves. Just gently up and gently down. You've surrendered to the water, haven't you? Because the waves are still moving you a little bit, and they might be carrying you a little closer to shore. Or you might have been caught in one of these ocean currents that's bringing you a little bit further out to sea. But you're just bobbing along. It's quite a nice picture, isn't it? Bobbing along, surrendering to the ocean, and just letting the currents and the tides and waves just carry you for that little bit. You might feel a little weightless, because, water makes everything a little bit better in that regard. But you're not fighting anything. You're not frantically trying to get yourself to a certain place. You're just floating, relaxing, letting it be. Which raises the important question. Should we fight the current? It's kind of the question that this podcast is centered around today. Should we fight the current? Well, I've got the answer for you, coming up in just a couple of minutes. Enable Pushing Back the Shadows to continue supporting people in the mental health community, their friends and their family. By pledging just $1 a month, you could help us to continue supporting people with depression, with anxiety, with bipolar and other mental illnesses. You can also unlock exclusive rewards, behind the scenes, sneak previews of upcoming posts and much, much more. So head over to www.patreon.com/Alex Davis PBTS to find out more. Our natural impulse is to fight the current, isn't it? You hear all the stories about the tragedies in the ocean and that, where people have been caught up in the current and they've just been swept out to sea. And some of them get rescued, some of them don't. But so that gives us that kind of almost impulse to fight the current. We don't like surrendering. And as human beings, we don't like not being in control of something, do we? Surrendering that control, kind of accepting that we aren't in control of something. We don't like that. We like to be in control. We love being in control of every little detail of our lives. Things like when you go into work and you hit the traffic. And it's so frustrating because you know that no matter what you do, no matter how much you complain, how much you honk your horn, whatever, you can't control it. There is nothing you can do to make that traffic lessen. Likewise, things like the weather. We hate not being able to control whether it's sunny or rainy or snowy or whatever. We like control, so to surrender to those waves or the current is difficult because it feels wrong. We feel like we should be in control, like we should actually be able to fight it. If it's taking us in a direction we don't want to go, our natural instinct is to swim against it. But how often does that get us where we want to go? It depends on the situation, doesn't it? I mean, if you're in the river, then depending on how strong the current is, you can actually get to where you want to be. Same with any body of water. But if the current's strong enough, and you fight it, you're just using up energy and not going anywhere. Because it's almost like you're swimming up against an invisible wall that's keeping you from making any kind of progress. Wouldn't you say? So what do we do? Now, I'm not a lifeguard, so I'm not giving any kind of advice in terms of when you're swimming in the sea or in the river or whatever. But in terms of mental health, when the river of life, let's call it that, the river of life is trying to push us in a direction that we don't want to go in, i.e., you wake up one morning and your bad day is a really bad day with your mental health. You know, it might be that you're in the Harrowing Void and there's emptiness and you're not really feeling anything and there's just nothing. It might be that case. Or it might just be that you're feeling kind of really, really down and sad, lonely, whatever. Or that you're really anxious. But whatever a bad day looks like for you, that's what you're feeling. Alright, so just think about that for a second. You're feeling a bad day. What do you do? Do you sit there and say, well, do you know what? I'm not going to let it stop me. I'm going to fight it. I'm going to do everything that I'd normally do. I'm not going to take extra breaks or anything like that. I am going to push through it. Or do you say, do you know what? Okay, I recognise it's a bad day. I'm going to take it slowly. I'm not going to do as much. I'm going to do what I can. And what I can't do, that's alright. Or do you aim for somewhere down the middle, where you say, okay, I'm not going to do quite as much, but I'm still going to get the things that I need to do. I'm just going to prioritise a bit better, and I'm going to go from there. Or do you go really to the extreme and say, oh, it's such a bad day, I'm not going to do anything at all? We all have different approaches. Some of them work, some of them don't. And part of this ties straight back into to how we deal with it, because it's an individual illness. It's different for everybody. But what would you do in that situation? One thing I've always been guilty of is that I try and push through it. And I do. Whether it's intentional or not, I always try and push myself through. Because I think, well, do you know what? Normally I can do this, so why should I let it stop me? I'm going to do it. And in some ways, that can be quite good. Because it means you still get things done. But at the same time, and this is where over on YouTube I've talked about the importance of practicing that self-care and the pacing, it's something that can actually lead to you feeling worse the next day, can't it? If you've used up more energy than you've got, then you're going to have to take more energy the next day to fill it back up, aren't you? Think of it almost like people talk about a sleep debt. If you don't get enough sleep, even when you get a brilliant night's sleep the next night, you're still paying back a little bit of the sleep that you've missed. So pushing through doesn't sound like the answer. So what about just kind of staying in bed or on the sofa doing nothing? Again, not really the answer. Because you'll feel worse, because you've not achieved anything. At least that's how it works with me. You might find it actually works better. So, this is the important part. Okay? This is what it all boils down to. Should you power through? Should you do absolutely nothing at all? Or should you strive to be somewhere in the middle? The answer is quite simple. You should float. You're listening to Pushing Back the Shadows. Now I know in this instance floating does sound a little bit like doing nothing, but it's not, and you'll see why in just a second. So first off, if your depression is taking you down a route that you really, really, really do not want to go down, i.e. something along the lines of self-harm, suicide, that sort of thing, then yes, fight it. Do something about it. But if it's just a bad day, then you float. And by that I mean you accept that it's a bad day. You acknowledge that it may pass. Maybe it'll be a couple of days, maybe it'll be a week, but the good day will come again. And you authorize yourself a little bit of leeway. So those are the 3 points there. You accept, you acknowledge, and you authorize. So let's look at accepting, first off. The bad days will come. We all get them. Whether we've got mental health problems or not, we all get bad days. Just like we all get good days. And a bad day does not mean that the good day will never come again. It just means at the moment the good day isn't there. And part of the trick is learning to accept that. And it's one thing that, I've struggled with, but I'm better at now. Because when the bad day comes, I say, alright, you know what, it's a bad day. I will do what I can. And if I can't do it, then okay. But it's a bad day, fine. It is what it is. I accept it for what it is. I don't try to make it something that it's not. Because if you try and fight your way out of a bad day and try and turn it into a good day, then usually it makes it worse somehow. Because you're draining yourself of the vital energy that you need to keep yourself going. So accept it. And then you acknowledge. Now, this one's a hard one. Because when you're on those bad days, when you're stuck in that tunnel, it can be very easy to think that there is no light, there's no hope, that the good days will never come again. But they will. We can't see into the future, so we don't know when they will come. But we do know that we will get a good day at some point. And by good day, I don't necessarily mean you'll be on top of the moon, winning the lottery, everything will be going well, you'll get all your hopes, dreams and aspirations fulfilled. I mean that it won't be quite as bad as it is now. There'll be a few glimmers of hope, a few little rays of sunshine. Because a lot of the time, for me particularly, that's how I roll. The bad days are as bad as they can get, and then you have some kind of mediocre days. But comparatively, the mediocre days are actually good days compared to the bad days. It's all to do with your perspective, but you acknowledge that it's a bad day, and you acknowledge that good days will come back. It's just a bump in the road. And okay, it might be a really awful road that's full of potholes left, right and centre, and the good days don't come for another week or a month or however long, but there will be good days again. It's just a matter of finding them. But you acknowledge that it's a bad day and the good days will return. And that brings us on to the last A. Authorize. Because we authorize ourselves that bit of leeway. You think to yourself, okay, and this bit ties back into acknowledgement. You think, okay, I can't do as much today. Maybe you planned to go and do the shopping, but your anxiety is that high you cannot get yourself out the door. Okay, you can't do it. Tomorrow is another day. Tomorrow is another opportunity. Or you see how you feel in a few hours. Maybe you'll feel like you can do it then. Or perhaps you'll feel like you can do it at night, because there are 24-hour shops out there. But you authorize yourself to take that step back, to take things that little bit slower. because you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be Superman or Superwoman and do everything. You are allowed to take a slower day. Now, yes, there are going to be commitments that you have to face, be it work, be it kids, whatever your obligations are that you have to do. But that is where the planning and the prioritising comes in. I'll give you an example. When I was working for the bank, I used to go through my week, and this was the thing, it was constantly 12 till 8 shifts. So that's 8 p.m, not night times. And it crippled any kind of opportunity for a social life, because you think most people are working 9 till 5. Well, if you're finishing at 8, you're not eating until about 9, maybe 10 o'clock. So you're not getting to bed until 11, 12 o'clock if you're being realistic. And so sometimes you're not even up until 7:30, 9 o'clock in the morning. And you've got to get your shopping done in that time. You've got to get all your other stuff. You know, if you've got phone calls to make, bills to pay, whatever, you've got to get that done in those hours before you go to work. And the fact that I was on the bus at the time as well, you know, meant that the commute times, the journeys were longer, so it stretched my day out, and I really didn't have that much time. But it meant that I was left with little energy as well, fighting these mental health battles. And so some of my extracurricular activities, if you want to call it that, like going to church on a Sunday, like participating in some of the events that I used to participate in, they got stifled. Yes, I had the time to do them, because in a lot of cases I was free, but I didn't have the energy. So I prioritised to make sure that what needed to get done, the things that were kind of not quite life and death, but make and break, were done. Then everything else, it was, okay, if it gets done, it gets done. If it doesn't, it doesn't. It's not important. And it can seem like a harsh way of looking at it, but really, it's a very important thing to do, because you pace yourself, you prioritise, you authorise yourself that little bit of time to say, do you know what? I don't need to do it right now, so I won't. I will do something for me, a little bit of rest, relaxation, recuperation. And that is my advice for you. Don't fight the currents. Unless they're taking you to a really dangerous place, don't fight it. Float. Accept. Acknowledge. And authorise. And you never know. The next bad day might get a little bit easier. That's all from me for today. Thank you ever so much for tuning in. And yeah, I'm really pleased that we've managed to get up to 40 episodes. We are still going to be continuing, so don't worry about that. I'm not kind of saying, oh, yep, we've reached a milestone, we can give in. But thank you ever so much for all the support that you give us. Thank you also to our patrons over at Patreon. So that's Louise, Luce, Samantha, Cheryl, Yee, Shirley, Tamara and Alex. Thank you ever so much for the work that you put into it as well, or the contributions you make. And hopefully more of you guys will check that out as well, because it does help us keep going. It helps us meet our running costs and things like getting the licensing and all these things that we need as well. So thank you to those of you who have pledged. Your support is invaluable. But I shall catch you guys next time on Pushing Back the Shadows podcast for episode 41. Take care, you guys have a good week. You've been listening to Pushing Back the Shadows. To find out more, head over to pushingbacktheshadows.com and hit subscribe to get all of our latest updates straight to your inbox. Alternatively, connect with us on Facebook, which is facebook.com/AlexDavisPBTS, or you can visit us on Twitter at AlexDavisPBTS. Enable Pushing Back the Shadows to continue supporting people in the mental health community, their friends and their family. By pledging just $1 a month, you could help us to continue supporting people with depression, with anxiety, with bipolar and other mental illnesses. You can also unlock exclusive rewards, behind the scenes, sneak previews of upcoming posts and much, much more. So head over to www.patreon.com/AlexDavisPBTS to find out more.